thank you very much, Ashley, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining me on this call this evening. I'd like to start first by briefly introducing myself. I am State Senator Mark Herring. I represent parts of Loudoun and Fairfax counties and have been in the State Senate since 2006. I grew up here in Virginia in Loudoun County. I was raised primarily by my mother with some help from my older sister, and with a combination of construction and restaurant jobs and Pell Grants and student loans, I was able to work my way through college at UVA. Later, I earned my law degree from the University of Richmond, and after law school, I wanted to come back to my hometown of Leesburg to establish my law practice and raise my family. My wife Laura and I have two children. Our daughter Peyton is 20, and our son Tim is a junior in high school. And I first ran for office in 1999 for the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors. I ran against a six-term incumbent Republican mayor who had never lost an election before, and I won. And I did it on good ideas and a whole lot of shoe leather. I was elected to the state senate in a special election in 2006, and then re-elected in 2007 and again in 2011. In the Senate, I have focused on a handful of issues, including transportation, protecting our kids from dangerous designer drugs, protecting seniors from financial fraud and abuse, and cracking down on those who commit acts of domestic violence. Throughout my career, I have been fighting for democratic values. I have fought efforts of right-wing legislators who want to restrict women's access to contraception and punish them for their private medical decisions. I am pro-choice, and I will always stand up to protect and defend a woman's right to choose. A few weeks ago, I put out my women's agenda, which focused on overturning the actions of Ken Cuccinelli and Bob McDonnell, and on expanding health care, protecting families, combating sexual and domestic violence, and creating jobs and pushing for paycheck equity. I work to implement President Obama's health care reforms and ensure that every Virginian has access to the affordable, quality health care they deserve. I've been working on keeping our children and communities safe from gun violence by pushing for universal background checks and leading efforts to provide better mental health screenings and treatment. And I opposed Ken Cuccinelli and Mark Obenshain's efforts to pass voter ID laws and restrict our right to vote, and stood up to protect the voting rights of all Virginians. Now, I don't know how many of you followed it, but on Saturday, Tea Party activists in Virginia nominated their choice for Attorney General and Lieutenant Governor to join Ken Cuccinelli on the ballot this fall. Emerging from the Republican convention was Senator Mark Obenshain, a Republican from Harrisonburg, for Attorney General. And over the last couple of days, Virginians have really been introduced to Senator Obenshain's extreme record, which includes sponsoring a bill that would require women to report miscarriages to the police, sponsoring the Personhood Amendment with Ken Cuccinelli, which would ban common forms of birth control, restrict women's access to contraception, and punish them for their private medical decisions, and voting to allow guns in bars. Voted to repeal that one handgun a month law. He voted to allow guns in child daycare centers and voted against closing the gun show loophole. Now, I know Mark Obenshain and Ken Cuccinelli. I have been in the same committee rooms as them on the floor of the Senate. I have seen them in action and up close. They do not stand for Virginians, not for all Virginians. They stand for the most hardcore right wing of the Republican Party. My record is vastly different from Mark Obenshain and Ken Cuccinelli's. And this November, we need a candidate with a proven record of winning tough campaigns and fighting for our values. And I have that experience. I want to take the office of Attorney General in a new direction and focus on the law, not politics. I want the office to again be an advocate for the people of Virginia, not a platform to push an extreme agenda or attack the president. I hope you will join me in this effort and support my campaign in the Democratic primary on June 11th. And thank you again very much for joining me on the call, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Great. Thank you, Senator Herring. And a reminder to all of our callers, please press 0 at any time to ask a question. Before we get started, we actually have a quick question for our callers. Will you pledge to join Senator Herring's campaign? Press 1 if you will volunteer for the campaign. Press 2 if you would like to donate to the campaign. And press 3 if you would like to do both. And again, press 0 at any time to ask a question. Our first question comes from Maria, and it's about the Star Scientific. Yes. Maria, you're on live.
Yes. Hey Mark, it's Maria. How do you feel about the whole, hi, how do you feel about the whole Star Scientific scandal going on with the governor?
Well, it's very disturbing. The Attorney General and the Governor are the state's top two elected officials, and they should be setting the very, very highest standards of ethical conduct. And when the stories first broke about lavish, undisclosed gifts from a company called Star Scientific, which had business in front of the state, that the governor accepted those lavish gifts and didn't report them. When that story first broke, I immediately called for an independent and federal investigation of what happened, because ordinarily our Attorney General might otherwise be able to investigate that, but it turned out that he himself was the recipient of these lavish gifts and did not disclose, not only did not disclose those gifts, but also did not disclose his ownership interest in the company when he should have. And he was handling a tax case between Star Scientific. He knew he had a conflict of interest. He should not have participated. He should have recused himself and didn't. And we need to have an investigation to find out just what happened. And initially, the governor's response was really to deflect the questions and to say, well, he didn't report the gifts because he wasn't required to under Virginia law, because the payment of a caterer for his daughter's wedding was really a gift to his daughter and not himself. But then later we learned that the gift, that the governor had signed the catering contract, and this payment relieved him of that obligation. And then money came back from the caterer to the governor's wife, and then again there were more undisclosed gifts and vacations to the Attorney General, and it just seemed that Virginians need to know what happened. They deserve answers, and only an independent investigation will do that. We need to know, and we need to get to the bottom of it and find out if public policy was influenced and if any laws were broken. And I just want to reiterate how important it is for the top two elected officials, the governor and Attorney General, should be setting the very highest standards. First of all, these gifts shouldn't be allowed at all, but in any event, the governor should have had and the Attorney General should have exercised much better ethical judgment.
Thank you so much. And remember, to our callers, please press 0 at any time to ask a question. But before we go on to the next one, we have another quick question for you. Do you feel that the Cuccinelli and Obenshain agenda is too extreme for Virginia? Please press 1 if you think it is too extreme. Press 2 if you do not. Yes, press 0 at any time to ask a question. Our next question comes from Norma on regulations on abortion clinics. Norma, you're on live.
Thank you. I would like to know, as Attorney General, is there anything you can do to cancel these harsh regulations on our abortion clinics?
Sure. Well, the question involves what we can do to overturn the onerous and unnecessary regulations that were imposed on women's health centers this year. And the answer is yes, we can, but it's going to take a lot of work on our part, and it's important that Virginians all across the state get mobilized to do it. As Attorney General, I will immediately issue an opinion that affirms that the State Board of Health has the legal authority to grandfather existing women's health centers under the licensing standards in place in 2011. And this is important because the Attorney General last year intervened when the Board of Health had provision in there, and he bullied them, intimidated them, because he disagreed with that because of his anti-choice views. And they backed off as a result of his intimidation. And that is completely inappropriate for an attorney general to do that. And what I will do is issue an opinion that they have the authority to grandfather the existing women's health center. In addition, I will support legislative efforts to repeal the regulations altogether. And I'll continue to support efforts to repeal the legislation that mandates medically unnecessary ultrasounds and so forth. This is something that these regulations are making it harder for women to access care that they medical care that they count on. It's making care more expensive for them. And these are women's health centers that provide a lot of services that they rely on. They'll provide cancer screenings, prenatal care, birth control, and these regulations are forcing the women's health centers to close. I know one's already closed down in the Hampton Roads area. One may have to close or move in Falls Church, and it's important that we, as Virginians, mobilize and get this turned around.
Great, thank you. And remember, to our callers, press 0 at any time to ask a question. And our next question for our callers is, what do you feel the top priority should be of our next Attorney General? Press 1 if you think it is reversing Ken Cuccinelli's attacks on women's rights. Press 2 if you think it should be on reducing gun violence. Press 3 if you think moving Medicaid expansion forward and implementing the Affordable Care Act. Press 4 if none of the above. And again, press 0 at any time to ask the question. Our next question comes from Howard on Medicaid expansion. Howard, you're on live.
I was wondering what about your position on the Medicaid expansion and what you as Attorney General could do to accelerate that process.
Okay. Well, thank you, Howard. And first of all, I was very privileged to serve on the Health Reform Initiative under Virginia Health Secretary Hazel. This was a group of stakeholders that included a couple of legislators. I was one of them, and representatives of hospitals, providers, patients, consumers. And this group came together to look at what we needed to do as a state to implement the Affordable Care Act in Virginia. I also served on a subcommittee that was responsible for looking at all the legislation dealing with health insurance exchanges in Virginia. I was the only Democrat on that subcommittee, and I thought it was important that Virginia have its own health insurance exchange so that we could set it up in a way that worked best for Virginia. Unfortunately, Governor McDonnell defeated that last year, and this year I carried legislation to establish a partnership. If we couldn't do our own, we should at least do a partnership with the federal government when they establish the health insurance exchange so that we can tailor it to meet Virginians' needs and that it will serve Virginians. So that's one part of it. The other part is the Medicaid expansion. And I have consistently supported the expansion. It will provide hundreds of thousands of Virginians with health care who currently cannot afford it. And we need to have an Attorney General who will help guide the Bureau of Insurance, the Health Department, and others as we expand Medicaid and implement the regulations. It'll be important to have an Attorney General who wants the program to succeed, who wants to help the hundreds of thousands of Virginians who need that health care and make sure that it will work for us. It's also important, Virginians are paying billions of dollars in taxes to the federal government, and expanding Medicaid will bring that money back to serve Virginians, and that's critically important, and as Attorney General, I will continue to fight for it.
Thank you. And just a reminder to our callers, please press 0 at any time to ask a question. But first, we have another poll question for you. Do you plan on voting in the June 11th Democratic primary? Press will definitely vote. Press 2 if you will probably vote. Press 3 if you will not vote. And again, please press 0 at any time to ask the question. And our next question, comes from Phyllis about education. Phyllis, you're on live.
Hi, Mark. This is Phyllis Randall. How are you doing?
Hello, Phyllis. How are you?
Hello? I'm great. Mark. My question is, of course, about education. And I was just wondering, what were your overall views on education and especially your support of public education? And can you tell us what your record is in support of pre-K and public education overall?
Sure. Well, first of all, from a philosophical standpoint, I think education is the key to helping our children achieve their hopes and dreams for their future. It's also the right thing to do for our economic development programs, and I have been a strong supporter of public education. I think much of our success as a state and as a nation is attributable to our system of free and universal public education. I'm very proud to have the endorsement, by the way, of the Virginia Education Association because of my strong record in support of public schools. I myself am a graduate of Loudoun County Public Schools. My daughter graduated from Loudoun County Public Schools. My son is in the schools right now. My wife works for the public schools. My sister's a public school teacher, and I'm very proud that my daughter is pursuing education as a career path as well. And it is important to have an attorney general who has a commitment to public education. And certainly as a state senator, I've been a big supporter of education of all kinds, but particularly public schools. And I supported Governor Kane's pre-K initiative. And it is critically important that we help the early education program, because if we can get kids started and prepared for school early so that they are reading on level by the third grade, studies show that they have a much greater chance and probability of achieving success later on. So I'm a big supporter of early education and pre-K. And as Attorney General, it's important to have one like me who supports public education, because there are continual efforts in the legislature to try to siphon away public funds away from public schools into private education. And there are some state constitutional prohibitions on that. And as Attorney General, I will be in a position to comment on all legislation that is moving through the General Assembly. And I know that process well because I'm currently in the Senate and have been there since 2006. And I will not hesitate to call out proposals that cross the constitutional boundaries in terms of siphoning away public money into private schools.
Great, thank you. And remember, to our callers, please press 0 at any time to ask a question. Our next poll question: how do you feel about the recently passed voter ID bill that would force every person to have and present a photo ID when they go and vote? Press 1 if you support it. Press 2 if you oppose it. And again, press 0 at any time to ask a question. Our next question comes from Kathy, and she is going to ask about gun violence. Kathy, you're on live.
Hi, Mark. This is Kathy Stewart-Shoup in Sterling, Virginia. And my question is, now that Congress has failed to act, what can we do to reduce the gun violence in Virginia? I think it's critical.
Yeah, thank you for the question. And it's hard to believe that after 6 years from the tragedy at Virginia Tech, that Virginia still has not closed the gun show loophole. And in the wake of tragic shootings in places like Newtown and Aurora, 6 years after the Virginia Tech massacre, it is hard to believe that Congress could not enact even universal background checks. And you know, I also support a ban on assault weapons. And you know, it's disappointing that Congress couldn't have acted. They should have. But they did fail to act, and we need to do what we can at the state level to close the gun show loophole and ban these assault-style weapons. None of these reforms on their own or taken together can prevent every tragedy from occurring, but the time to take action is now. And we owe it to the victims and their families and to ourselves and to future generations to do this. And the legislature needs to act. And as Attorney General, I will be in a good position to be an advocate for those who share this belief. And I know it's sometimes difficult in the General Assembly, but we've got to continue to fight. And this is something that most Americans believe in: universal background checks. And we need to continue to advocate for it. We need to continue to fight for it. And if there are legislators who still are digging in their heels, then we just need to keep the pressure up, and eventually they'll realize this is what the people want, and they'll take action.
Great, thank you. And again, just a reminder to our callers, please press 0 to ask a question. Now we have John on the line who has a question about the equality agenda. John, you're on live.
Mark, John Whitley in Williamsburg. You made a very impassioned and believable. Hey, man, good to be with you. You made a very intelligent, impassioned, and clear statement about your commitment to women and LGBT rights, and referenced your equity agenda. Tell me, how are you going to get that in place when you become Attorney General? Now, rest assuredly, you'll have my support, but I want to know, what can we do to make it happen?
Thank you. Well, and for the callers on the line, John was referring to the equality agenda, which I released about 6 weeks ago, and it laid out a detailed agenda to protect LGBT rights. And I also made it clear and want to state clearly that I support marriage equality. I will work for marriage equality, and that's going to take some time. And as we work toward marriage equality, and I think it's important to have an Attorney General have that position, because the Attorney General is the chief legal officer of the state, and equality is a fundamental, really American principle. And so as we work toward marriage equality, I laid out some very specific things that we can do really from day one as Attorney General. They center around 3 main principles. First, prohibiting discrimination in state and local government. Second, protecting children and ensuring safety in our schools. And third, promoting strong families. So let me take the first one, prohibiting discrimination in state and local government. There are things that we can do on day one. First of all, some of you may remember one of the earliest things that Ken Cuccinelli did in his term as Attorney General was issue an incorrect and harmful opinion that our state boards of visitors at state universities and colleges could not include sexual orientation as a part of their non-discrimination policy. That's wrong. That contravened a prior Attorney General opinion. On day one, I will issue a correct opinion and reverse it. Secondly, the Attorney General also said that the governor could not include sexual orientation as a part of state hiring policy. And I think that's wrong. I think the governor, surely as the chief personnel officer, has the authority, same authority that Mark Warner exercised, the same authority that Tim Kaine exercised when they were governors. And I will issue that opinion, and it will provide our next governor with the authority to include those non-discrimination provisions. In terms of other things that we can do, the General Assembly this past session passed a law requiring local school divisions to have bullying policies. And, too often there are incidences of bullying and harassment that too often have resulted in the victim committing suicide and the victim of bullying and harassment being targeted because of actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. And so that's why the General Assembly this past year passed legislation requiring local school divisions to have a policy against bullying in public schools. And what I'll do is I will partner with those local school divisions to implement the new law and adopt anti-bullying policies that include protection for LGBT students. And then we also need to promote strong families. And I was absolutely shocked that legislation, not this past session, but the one before that, passed that allows adoption and foster care agencies who receive taxpayer money discriminate based on sexual orientation, and that is wrong. And so I will work to protect LGBT families. We need to reverse those laws, and those are some of the things that we can do that I can do as Attorney General on day one and throughout my term as Attorney General as we work toward marriage equality.
Great, thank you. And for our final question, we have Karen with about ways to help in the upcoming June 11th primary. Karen, you're on live.
Yes, hi Mark. Karen Schultz from Winchester, Virginia. Wondering if you could outline for us what the steps are that we can do to be helpful to you and your team for the primary, and then once you go beyond that, for the upcoming election in November.
Great. Well,